This is Meze's new $2,000 planar magnetic headphone, the Poet. And if you've seen my other reviews of Meze headphones, unfortunately this one's going to sound kind of similar. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan, this is Super Review, and this will actually be my 8th review of a Meze product ever. And here's just a thing to say, is like, I try to leave preconceptions at the door when I evaluate a new product. When something comes in, I try not to carry over feelings or opinions about a brand's other products, but nonetheless, I kind of say the same sort of thing when it comes to every Meze product that I review, which is that it's built fantastic and it sounds almost very good, but has some treble issues. And unfortunately, I'm going to say kind of the same thing here when it comes to the Poet. Now, to Meze's credit, they keep sending me products to review, and I appreciate that. And so just kind of consider this a letter to Meze, a letter of encouragement that I think we can do better. But let us talk about this headphone and how exactly I think we can do better. So to start with, I guess a quick shout out to Meze again for sending this headphone in for review. If you want to check it out, I will of course have it linked down in the description down below. But here's what you get inside the packaging, which I guess actually on that note of the packaging, here's the box that it comes in. And they actually made a point to talk about their new eco-friendly packaging, which I actually genuinely appreciate this. So many headphones come in just ridiculous boxes that I have piled up underneath my desk, all kinds of crap in them that I can't recycle. I appreciate that I can recycle that, like legitimately. And what you get inside the box is what you see here, which is actually kind of some nice stuff. This is the carry case that the Poet comes in. Let me move this to the side for a second to show you this carry case. And it's actually a little bit different than the carry cases that Meze has been including with their headphones. This is a more traditional kind of box shape. You can see that it does have a foam cutout for the headphone itself, and it does have a latch. I actually kind of prefer the other cases that they have, though. They're a little bit more form-fitted. They're just more compact. My suspicion, though, is that because of the different form that we have here on the headband of the Poet, that they had to go with a different design, and ergo we've got this box, which again, still a pretty nice box, and certainly nicer than having a lot of expensive packaging that you end up throwing away. Okay, apart from that, the headphone itself, we'll talk about more in detail in a bit, but let's talk about this cable that it comes with. And this is a little baggie that it comes with that I think is just for holding the cable, which is a nice little baggie. But let's talk about this cable. This is, one of Meze's nicer cables. They generally just do build quality fantastic, and their cables are no exception. Although that said, I do have a couple of nits to pick with this particular cable. So aesthetically, I think this thing is gorgeous. I think that the drape on it is just fantastic. You can see that it's braided. The behavior is just about perfect. So what are my complaints? Well, okay, I apologize because I've always got something to complain about. That's just me. But complaint number one is going to be the length. And you're going to notice I'm roadie wrapping this thing for a while. Now, this probably makes sense for other people who are primarily like desktop users, but the cable here is about 8.5 feet long, which for me is definitely on the long side. I generally prefer a shorter cable, like a 4-foot cable for portable use, and I generally find that like a 5-foot cable is maybe a good balance, a good trade-off, maybe 6 foot. But 8.5 foot, that is actually a pretty long cable. So I don't know, hopefully you know for yourself whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing. The other thing that I will make a small complaint about is that my understanding is that this is the only termination that you can get it with is a standard 6.3 millimeter single-ended termination. Now, I don't mind that it's single-ended, I just mind that it's 6.3 millimeters and it doesn't have like an easy screw off to give me a smaller 3.5 millimeter. So basically this is set up to be connected to a desktop amplifier or to a home stereo system or something like that. And if you're into more portable sources, while this headphone is not particularly hard to drive, I think the cable situation just kind of means that it's not really situated for that. Now, that said, we do have, pretty standard dual 3.5 millimeter entry cables here. I guess I'll highlight that briefly. So if you've got an alternative cable that you prefer to use, super easy to find alternatives. I like this as a solution, but nonetheless, unfortunately, as much as I like this cable, it's gonna be sitting inside the bag and be not something that I personally use. But I guess that will lead us into talking about the headphone itself, the build quality. And like I already alluded to, the build quality is like, this is something that Meze always does really exceptionally well. I would say Meze's like worst built headphones, if you could even say such a thing, are generally better built than pretty much any other company's headphones out there. So Meze does a really good job. There are a couple of things that I have to complain about, however, with the Poet, but I don't know, generally I would say that this is in line with my typical expectations for Meze. So just aesthetically, let's talk about this headphone. This is basically built off of, and it's kind of an extension of the Meze Lyric platform, which is traditionally a closed back headphone. I mentioned this is an open back headphone, so it is a departure, but also kind of similar. So it's even using the same pads. In fact, the ear pads are replaceable and removable with this little magnetic mechanism that, frankly, I really like. In fact, I wish that Meze had included maybe some alternate pads in the package of this. I haven't seen any alternate pads available for sale on their website, but I'm very interested to do some pad swapping on this headphone because, again, there's some things I would like to improve with the sound quality, and pads can actually make a big difference. But as it is, we've got this pad, which is, as far as I can tell, and I've got the Lyric 2 next to me, as far as I can tell, this is exactly the same pad as was used on the Lyric 2. Same mechanism, same fit, and same materials and stuff all around. Apart from that, like the cup shapes and stuff is all basically the same as the Lyric, although you'll notice that obviously the colorway and the materials are quite different. This is a silver versus a black, and then the Lyric 2 had like a wood outer panel, whereas this one has got like I believe they call it a steel panel, and this is, of course, an open back headphone rather than a closed back. So if you're listening to your music loudly, it's going to be leaking out the sides, and outside volume is going to leak inside a little bit, but that is just to be expected with an open back headphone. That is your trade-off. That generally I think is a good trade-off because open backs just generally sound a lot better than closed backs. Apart from that, you can see that here on the headband, the adjustment mechanism is very similar to what we saw on the Lyric, but then otherwise the headband is quite a departure from what Meze has been doing with the Lyric platform. And here's where I'm not sure I actually liked it that much. Couple reasons, all right? Reason number one, you might notice, is that I've got this thing adjusted to just about the maximum size. There's basically not as much adjustment range with this design, at least given my head shape and head size, as there is with the Lyric. With the Lyric, I think my adjusters end up somewhere in the middle, which just means that if you've got a bigger head than me, there's room for more head. And then if you've got a smaller head than me, then there's also room for a smaller head as well. Whereas here with this one, if your head's much bigger than mine, this headband might not actually fit you. In fact, sometimes I actually had it completely maxed out, although backing it off just a little bit did seem to fit me the best. And then I guess the other thing that I just don't like about it quite as much is I don't think it looks as nice as the Lyric does. And maybe, I'm just spoiled by how good looking the Lyric is. In fact, someone was asking me, I think it was Blaine from the Headphone Show, was asking me about my favorite headphone build. And I think the Lyric is actually my favorite headphone build. So while this is a different departure from that, I'm gonna have to note that I don't like it quite as much as the Lyric. Although I will say that, the construction, the materials and stuff are all still pretty fantastic on this headphone. And like other Meze headphones, it is, very user serviceable. You can see there's screws down here, which means if something falls apart, Meze does a really good job of selling replacement parts and you can replace it for yourself, which is pretty cool. Although it feels like it's built well enough that things aren't going to fall apart unless you drop something. Okay, anything else to talk about the build quality before I throw this thing on my head? Let me just check my notes. I guess, yeah, before I throw it on my head, I will mention the weight on this thing is, on my scale, 410 grams, which puts it at actually fairly lightweight for a kind of flagship expensive planar magnetic headphone. A lot of these things come in at 500 grams and more, so being just above 400 grams is actually pretty good. It's interesting that in their spec sheet, they note the weight as 350 grams without pads, but I weighed it with pads, in case you're curious. And also my scale is going to be slightly different than theirs, so if you see official numbers that are slightly different than 410, that's normal, but on my scale, 410 grams, which for me is good. Okay, let me throw it on my head and I will talk about fit and comfort of this headphone. There you go. Let me duck into view so you can take a look at it. So yeah, this is generally a very nice, comfortable fitting headphone, which is, again, what we kind of come to expect from Meze Audio. I will say that the earpads, like the Lyric earpads, are a little bit on the small side. And this is not a complaint. I'm just saying, like, in relation to other headphones, like let's say a Heddphone headphone, or even like a ZMF headphone where they've just got gobs of space inside of the earpad, I would say that the space on here is actually probably more appropriate. Like, it feels like my ear has a place to go, and I do have some room left and right. I think I have more room top to bottom, and then the depth on the earpad is actually quite good. I guess I'm gonna punch it on that just to highlight. Like, the depth is actually quite good, but it's mostly like the left to right that there's not a lot of space in, which again for me is not, this is not a complaint. I'm just kind of mentioning that if you're used to these bigger ear cups, this one will feel a little bit more on the compact side, but not compressed or sweaty or anything like that. Generally, it's pretty good. And I say it's actually kind of what's advantage is the word I'm looking for. It's kind of an advantage versus some of those bigger ones, because some of those bigger headphones, a lot of the times the ear cups are so big that you'll get like a break in the seal along your jaw. At least I do for sure. Something like the HD800 even, right? It's like it just doesn't really, it feels like it's made big for the sake of being big and impressive, but not actually made to be ergonomic. Whereas I feel like Meze with the Lyric platform and here now with the Poet does a really good job of balancing that. Like it feels really good in my head. I get a good seal. It's comfortable. The clamp is sufficient. And with the weight being relatively low plus a pretty good clamp, like it feels stable in my head. It doesn't feel like it's going to fall off. And frankly, that is something that you got to worry about with these headphones a lot of the times. So yeah, generally pretty good there. Anything else to talk about the build quality? I don't think so. I apologize if I missed anything, but yeah, just overall, like I think it looks pretty handsome. I don't like the headband design as much as the Lyric headband design, but functionally it is, apart from it, you know, maybe not working on big heads, a very nice headphone. So that will lead us into talking about the sound of the Meze Poet. And well, let's jump over to Squiglink to start with this, all right? So this is the frequency response of the Poet. And find a place to put this headphone that's not in the way. And this is up on Squiglink right now, or at least by the time you watch this video, so you can check it out for yourself. But yeah, this is a frequency response that you should expect from this headphone. And maybe just to start, like typically what I expect from a Meze headphone in terms of tuning is some flavored sound, some sort of a version of like a V-shaped sound signature. We've got some low end emphasis, some excited top end, and mid-range is not necessarily, like they're not going for a neutral sound signature. But if you look at this frequency response, it kind of looks to me like Meze was going for a neutral sound signature. And if you know my preference, you know that that should be in the direction that I'm looking for. So let's do a little bit of analysis on this thing together before we talk about my personal listening impressions. So from down here to the bass up to, you know, about 2 kilohertz, that is relatively flat. Okay, again, this is kind of that neutral. You're not seeing like a big bass boost or anything like that. Generally pretty flat, and you've got a fairly modest upper mid-range lift. This is kind of where your vocals are, although it is a little bit on the pulled back, relaxed side. So if you're concerned about shoutiness in your vocals, definitely the Meze Poet is not going to give you that. And then up here, of course, you get your pretty typical excited upper treble, which is what we kind of come to expect, not just from Meze, but from a lot of planar magnetic headphones, to be honest. But let's also be honest, a lot from Meze as well. So yeah, it's kind of my general analysis on the sound signature. But let's talk about my actual listening impressions. And this is where, unfortunately, the Poet just is, it's kind of meh for me, okay? Let's talk first about that tonality, all right? It's going for a neutral sound signature, which should be the direction that I like. I should not be complaining right now. But I'm going to be annoying and still kind of complain about it because it comes across really kind of low contrast and like warm tilted in it, right? You saw I talked about the upper mid-range not being very forward, and because of that, vocals tend to fall kind of back in the mix. And you also have this issue where there's just like not enough contrast to generate separation when the music gets busy, okay? When you're listening to simple music, like the separation, delineation, and the definition on attack on instruments and stuff is actually pretty well done here on the Poet. But when the music gets busy, when there's just more stuff going on, it does start to get a little bit jumbled up. And I found that the imaging just overall ends up being kind of crowded and very non-distinct here on the Poet. The bass is actually pretty good on this. Like it's not standout, I wouldn't say, but it extends well and it has a decent bit of snap on it. And I'm pointing this out because I was trying to play around with EQ to see if I could get this more toward a sound signature that I like. And I could definitely improve the overall tonality, but kind of consistently I was, whatever I was doing with EQ was not necessarily good for that bass attack and tactility, because that was something I kept losing. So it does have that, it does that pretty well. Again, I don't think it's standout versus some other headphones at its price range, but amongst the things that it does, I think that is probably one of the things that it does better. Unfortunately, the biggest problem with this headphone is just the freaking treble. It is gritty and sharp at the best of times. And it ranges from being, maybe just sometimes a little bit distracting to sometimes like kind of disqualifying for this headphone, depending on what music you're listening to. It's just a lot of music that I found it actually generally kind of uncomfortable to listen to on this headphone. As an example, so when I did my Earphone award a couple months ago, I talked about my favorite album of 2024, which is Nilüfer Yanya's Method Actor. Specifically, I'll call out one track if you want to check it for yourself, but there's a track called Binding, which, yes, it does have a lot of high frequency in the mix, and that song was just kind of like uncomfortable to listen to on the set. Like, it's just sharp and gritty again, but just like kind of excessively unpleasant. Another track that I like to use for specifically like treble discomfort is Mazzy Star's Fade Into You. And this is a track that generally, it frankly sounds fantastic on almost everything you put it on, but there is like this tambourine hit that's consistently throughout that track that can come across a little bit bright and splashy on certain headphones, and this is definitely one where it's just kind of uncomfortable to listen to. And then finally, like if you don't trust the production quality of Nilüfer Yanya and Mazzy Star, how about Michael Jackson? Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, right? A very famous song, is just frankly uncomfortable to listen to here on the Poet. And again, it's not like consistent on every single song that the treble is a problem on this headphone, but at $2,000, like it's just kind of, I don't know, it's really hard to overlook the treble on the Poet. It's definitely plucky and incisive, which is, again, kind of an attribute that you can expect a lot of the times with planar magnetic headphones. And because of that, you get, again, sharp transients, good delineation, but it becomes overly excessive if you're listening to certain music that I often find myself listening to, and generally becomes really distracting and hard to focus on anything else. So let me bring in a couple of other headphones for comparison, including one that I had, my own complaints about treble with as well. This is the Head Audio Heddphone 2 GT. I had to get the right number of heads in there. But this is a $2,200 AMT driver headphone, so a little bit different than the planar, but similar price range, also an open back headphone. And this is definitely going for a very different tonality. We'll just start in the build quality though. Here's like where you can see that Meze has just kind of like a big advantage in terms of ergonomics and stuff, and build quality and fit and finish and just feeling super premium. Not that the GT doesn't feel premium, but it also does feel a little bit Frankenstein, which is not an effect that you get here at all with the Meze. In terms of sound signature wise though, they are quite different. They're going for a different thing, whereas the Meze, I would say, is going for kind of a warm, laid-back, neutral sound signature with an overly excited treble. The 2 GT, I would say, is going for kind of like a modest V-shaped sound signature. It's got this like slightly warm, low-end, tilted sound signature that can be a little bit on the aggressive, like assertive side, and I like that aspect of it. But there is also a little bit of treble excessiveness, let's call it. But here's what I'll say. When I listen to those same tracks that are frankly uncomfortable on the Poet, I definitely noticed that the treble doesn't sound ideal here on the Heddphone 2 GT, but it's not like the sort of thing that I want to take it off my head and stop listening to it. Like it's like, okay, you could do with a little bit less treble around 10K head. But this needs more than just a couple of dB less treble. Overall sound signature, I would say that this sounds, thicker, fuller. It's got that muscular bass to it. So if you're looking for that bass physicality behind it, I do think that while the Poet does a decent job with the bass attack, I think overall you're going to get a warmer, bassier sound out of the headphone as well. I think that the vocals don't end up being as pulled back. Now, that's again because I would describe this more as like a V-shaped sound signature, so you kind of get a little bit of a best of both. This ends up being a little bit less mid-range focused, but I don't know. I don't think that the mid-range focus tune of the Poet is necessarily doing it any favors. Again, it could use a little bit more contrast than what we've got here. A couple of dB extra in at around 2K, 2 to 3K actually helps us quite a bit in terms of its tonal balance. So if you're fine with EQ, you can do that, and you can also fix up the treble a little bit, but assuming you're just listening to it out of the box, overall, I do prefer the Heddphone 2 GT. Okay, next headphone I wanted to bring in for comparison is this guy. So if that headphone being a little bit more expensive wasn't a fair comparison, well, here we've got the Audeze MM500. And this one is only $1,700, also a planar magnetic headphone. And in terms of build quality, like just in terms of materials, fit and finish, and like feeling premium, I will say that this thing feels about as premium as the Meze. In fact, it might even feel more heavy duty, although some of the ergonomic stuff is not quite as refined as we got here on the Meze. I'll say that this thing is a little bit clampier, so people who are sensitive to clamp pressure might not find this headphone comfortable. As well, just like holding it, like this is a small complaint, but like it's really hard for me to hold this thing without the headphone just kind of flopping about. So some trade-offs there. But in terms of sound, this is where, frankly, I just find the Odyssey better across the board. The Odyssey is just a fantastic, this is my favorite headphone ever. So in this comparison, you can imagine that I'm going to favor the Odyssey. But how would we describe the sound? Okay. I would say that this is also going for a warm, kind of laid back, neutral sound signature, but it does it more convincingly. Like this sounds more vocal focused, like it does the vocals fantastic. The resolution, transparency on vocal repro, the nuance, the micro contrast, and the detail is so exquisitely pulled out here on the MM500. And then still the bass physicality behind it is nice. It's got this nice assertive bass quality to it that, you know, is approximated over here with the Poet, but I think again, it just kind of lacks the contrast to really give you the definition that something like the MM500 gives you. I think in terms of like sense of head stage, if that's an important thing for you, I think the MM500 is still doing a better job. Imaging quality generally better. And still the treble is just so much smoother on the MM500. If anything, you could probably say that the MM500 treble is a little bit on the dark side. You can see this in the frequency response. And if you're listening to it, especially in comparison, you're going to notice that this just doesn't have any of like the edge or the pluckiness that you get with the Poet. And maybe that's a thing that you want out of your planar magnetic headphone. In some ways, like the MM500 just can sound pretty organic and it's got almost like a soft edge to it. But it still has a really strong sense of definition, I feel, which is what I think this headphone does so well and what I wish the Poet could do. Anything else to talk about? No. I mean, like this has just got smooth treble, a visceral sound, neutral, fantastic vocal repro. And the Poet is unfortunately just kind of mid to listen to, or sometimes a pain to listen to. And frankly, I think that will bring us to my conclusion of this review. It pains me. It pains me. Again, like I really appreciate that Meze's been good. You know, even though I keep my 8th Meze review and I've never really given them a super glowing review. They've been good about supporting me with headphones, which I appreciate, but this one's probably my least favorite of the bunch, and maybe mostly so because the price point at $2,000 for an open back headphone. I feel like Meze can absolutely do better than this. Maybe another pad swap could actually help. I'm actually pretty interested to try that out because of the easy pad swap mechanism. But as it is with this headphone, as it is, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to give the Poet just 2 stars out of 5. That said, if you want to check it out for yourself, and I do encourage you to hear it for yourself, don't take my word for it. Maybe I'm not their target customer. Check it out for yourself. I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Joined with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.